Yevamos Daf test is not a very long daf, but it is an extremely complex daf, which we'll try to simplify. The daf has two primary independent sugyas, totally unrelated to each other. The first one is concluding the discussion of the word aleha. The Gemara wants to know what Rebbe is going to do with the word aleha. As we've seen, Rebbe has a different drasha. We'll explain the drashas of each Rebbe and the Rabbanan and what they do with each other's psukim. Second part of the daf is discussing the Mishnah and why it only lists 15 examples of women who are patur from the mitzvah yibum because they are an erva to the brother that they're falling to. The question is going to be that there should be a 16th, and the Gemara will try to say that the only 16th you can have is a case that's under a machlokes, and we don't discuss machlokes in. The Gemara is going to try to show a number of examples where we did discuss machlokes in the Mishnah. So let's begin. We're discussing the source that an erva who falls to yibum is patur from yibum. As we've seen, the chachamim, the rabbanan, learn out from the word aleha, which it says by the case of achos ishto, one's wife's sister. The Gemara had said that Rebbe had a different source of that halacha. Rebbe's source is from the extra hay in v'lakcha and v'yibma. So the Gemara wants to know, what does he do with the word aleha? There is an extra word aleha in the pasuk describing the iser of achos isha. It says, litzror aleha b'chayeha. What is that extra word aleha for? So the Gemara says that according to Rebbe, this is to teach me that the karbanos chatas are that we will list in a detail are only brought in a case where an isser was violated b'shogig, and that isser is an isser which carries kares had it been on purpose. So we're nothing to do with yibum here. This extra word aleha is to teach me halacha and karbanos chatas. So let's give an introduction, explain that there are four types of people who have to bring a carbon chatas, and two types of averos that they may have to bring the carbon chatas for a grand total of 8 cases that we need to know the halacha. 4 types of people are a yachid, a regular individual, a nasi, that's a king or a ruler, a kohen gadol, which is called Mashiach, the anointed one in the Torah, and then there's a tzibor, entire congregation or the majority of Klal Yisrael that's over an avera because the Beis Din, the Sanhedrin, paskin the wrong halacha. So these are the 4 things: Yachid, Nasi, Kohen Gadol, Mashiach, and Tzibor. And we need to know the halacha in 2 types of averas. One is a regular avera, and the other one is an avera which is including avodah zarah. So therefore, you have 2 cases for each of the 4, for a total of 8 cases, which we need to know what their halacha is. Now, in all these, the Gemara says you only bring a carbon chatas if the type of avera that they violated, whether it's a regular one or an avodah zarah, was the type of avera that carries an isur kares hadn't been done on purpose, and they did b'shogeg by accident, usually for a wrong halachic decision. Now, it doesn't say that explicitly in any of these parshios. It does not say that we're only talking about an avera that carries kares. So how do we know that? How do we know these 8 halachos? So the Gemara says that the original source, the first one, is the case of a carbon, is the case of a regular avera that is violated by the entire or majority of the tzibor because of a mistaken ruling by Sanhedrin, and that's learned from the fact that the pasuk describing that says the word aleha. Aleha is used there. That is linked to the aleha of the achos isha, and just like an achos isha is an avera which includes kares if it's done on purpose and a chatas if it's done by accident, this case also is only referring to an avera which is kares if it's done on purpose and chatas if it's done by accident. So that's where you have to bring this carbon chatas. Now, that teaches me the halacha about the tzibur who violates a regular isser. How do I know about the kohen Mashiach who violates a regular isser? So the Gemara says that's because in the pasuk describing his obligation to bring a chatas, it says im kohen Mashiach echtel ashmas ha'am, for a sin of the congregation. That implies he has the same halachos as a tzibor. So just like a tzibor is only for a kares isser, here we're also by the kohen Mashiach we're also only talking about a kares isser. Now, how do you know by a nasi and by a yachid? So the Gemara says both of them contain the word mitzvos. It says asher nasi echtel v'asa achas mikol mitzvos ha'ila. So both of those use the word mitzvos, and in the pasuk describing the tzibor, which we started with, that also says mitzvos. It says v'nelam davar me'enei hakol v'asu achas mikol mitzvos Hashem. So all 3 have the word mitzvos. Therefore, nasi and yachid are connected to tzibor, just like tzibor is only if it's a kares isser, Nasi and Yachid are also only if they're Kares Yisurim. Now this is all for a regular Avera. None of this is talking about an Avera of Avodah Zarah. So now we see for all the 4 types of regular Averos, the only time you have to bring this Karban Chatos that's discussed here is if it's something which carries Kares. How do you see it by a regular Avera? How do you see it by an Isra Avodah Zarah? So the Gemara says, Tzibor that violates an Isra Avodah Zarah, we could learn from Tzibor that violates a regular Isra, because both have the word Me'ene. It says, V'im Me'ene, V'haya im Me'ene ha'ida nesesel shkaga. And it says, V'im kal das Yisrael yishgu v'nelam davar Me'ene ha'kol. Both have the word Me'ene, and therefore I learned from one to the other, Me'ene, that in the case of Avodah Zarah that's violated by a tzibor, you also have, it's limited to a case of kares. Now, the 3 individuals, that is, the Mashiach, the Nasi, and a regular individual, those 3 are lumped together as one. Interestingly, the Torah doesn't divide them up separately, doesn't have 3 separate parshios when discussing they violate an Isser Avodah Zarah. And what we've been discussing before, where it's a regular Isser, there's a separate parsha for each of those, the Mashiach, the Nasi, and the Yachid. The case of Avodah Zarah, they're all lumped together, and they're all in where it says, V'im nefesh achas yecheta, v'hanefesh asher yaseh, where it says, V'im nefesh achas yecheta b'shkaga, where they all do one, nefesh achas, one individual. These are all individuals, the Nasi, the Mashiach, and the Yachid are all individuals. And all of them, it begins by saying, V'im nefesh achas. The V'im, the Vav, that begins the pasuk, V'im, says you should link this parsha to the parsha that comes immediately before. One that comes immediately before is a discussion of a tzibor that violates an Isra Avodah Zarah. So that links to 2. Just like a tzibor that violates an Isra Avodah Zarah is only a type of Avodah Zarah which it carries kares. This is also only a type of Avodah Zarah which carries kares. Now to figure out, to fill in some of the details here, not every Avodah Zarah carries kares. The only things which are kares in Avodah Zarah is slaughtering to Avodah Zarah, burning ketores to Avodah Zarah, pouring wine to Avodah Zarah, and bowing to Avodah Zarah. However, other things like hugging, kissing, and things like that don't carry kares, and that's why there's a difference between what type of Avodah Zarah was performed. So here we see all 8 sources, according to Rebbe. Now, the Gemara wants to know, what are the Chachamim going to do? Where do they derive all of these 8 halachos? Before we go further, we have to note, what is the carbon that's brought in each of these? The Gemara brings a brayso that fills it in. We didn't need that information up till now. But there's different karbanos for these. As far as regular averos, the tzibor brings a par helam davar shel tzibor. The Kohen Mashiach also brings a par Kohen Mashiach. The Karban Chatas of a Nasi is a sa'ir, a goat, an adult male goat, and the Chatas of a Yachid, a regular individual, is either a kisva or a se'ira, a female lamb or baby goat. Now, for Avodah Zarah, it's different. A tzibor has to bring 2 korbanos, a par as an ola, and a sa'ir as a chatas. And the 3 individuals, Mashiach, Nasi, and Yachid, again, those aren't listed separately. When it comes to Avodah Zarah, they all bring a se'ira, an adult female goat. The Gemara now goes to the opinion of the Rabbanon. As we said, the Rabbanon cannot use this Rasha because they use the word aleha for limud about Yibum. So what is the word aleha? They can't use the word aleha to learn these halachos. How do they know these 4 halachos? So the Gemara says that they learn it differently entirely. They go to a pasuk in Bamidbar, which says, "Hanefesh asher ta'asa biyad Rama min ha'ezrach u'min ha'geras Hashem u'megadef u'nichrasa ha'nefesh ahi mikerev amma." This talks about kares, and it's talking about kares, they say, when it is a Isra Avodah Zarah, because it says, as Hashem hu megadef, he violates Hashem's word. So we're referring, and it's Hanefesh asher ta'asa biyad Rama, he rebels against Hashem. So this is referring to Avodah Zarah, and it says kares, and it's talking about a yachid, it's talking about an individual. So there are 3 individuals in Avodah Zarah that are all put together, as we said earlier. They're all put together in one parsha, not discussed separately. And here it says clearly that it's only v'nichrasa, that the only time they have to bring a karban chatas is where you have a v'nichrasa. So that's the Mashiach, the Nasi, and the Yachid who violated Nisar Avodah Zarah, b'shogeg, have to bring a karban chatas only if it's the type of thing which carried kares. Now, how do you learn that the same is true for those 3 individuals when they did any of the other averos that's not Avodah Zarah? So the Gemara says, because the pasuk right before that says Torah achaz yilchem la'oser b'shkaga, that's talking about a regular Isser. It says Torah Achas. It should be one rule for all the Averos. Comes right before the pasuk discussing Avodah Zarah, links the two together, and therefore these three individuals will have the same halacha. They also, their Karban Chatas is also only in a situation where they violated an Isser which carries kares, hadn't been done on purpose. Now, how do you know in the case of a tzibur that violates an Isser of Avodah Zarah? So the Gemara says that's because it begins with a ve'im nefesh. It begins with a vav. The vav connects it to what comes later. Right. Last time we said it connects to what comes earlier. Now we're saying it connects it to what comes later. And therefore, just like what comes later in the pasuk is only where there's kares, this is also talking about only where there's kares. So there's tzibur that's ever avodah zarah. How do you know a tzibur which violates any other avera? So that's because the word me'ene is used in both. This is the only drasha which is the same as the one that Rebbe says. The word me'ene is repeated. And therefore, you can learn from Avodah Zarah. You have a Gzeira Shava from the word Me'ene that says by Avodah Zarah V'tzibur to the word Me'ene it says by the regular Avera of a Tzibur. And therefore, you know all 8 halachos according to the Chachamim as well as according to Rebbe. So this solves all the problems of all the Limudim. It just leaves us some other things which have to figure out what is Rebbe going to do. So, we had a drasha here that the Chachamim used from the phrase Torah Achas, that put other Averos together with Avodah Zarah. What is Rabbi going to do with that pasuk? Torah Achas, it's one rule. What is that for? So Gemara says that's for a totally different thing. That's to show that there's no difference between an Ir Dachas and a Yachid. Ir Dachas is when an entire or majority of a city is convicted of Avodah Zarah. Now that's not the majority of a Klal Yisrael, so it doesn't count as a case of a tzibur. It's just really a big group of yichidim. It's a group of individuals. The question is, if they did it b'shogeg, what carbon should they bring? So the Gemara says, you may think that they don't go in the category of individuals and they bring a different carbon than a bunch of yichidim. Why? Because they have a different punishment. Yichidim usually, if they were to do it on purpose, would get kares. These, Ernei Dachas, get saif. They get punished with the sword. The Gemara here says that Yechidim would get skila. There's also a difference as far as whether their possessions are destroyed. The ones who get skila, their possessions are saved. The ones who get saif, their possessions are destroyed, like you have by an Ernei Dachas. So the halacha of the Ernei Dachas is different than individuals. So the question then is, do they bring the same carbon or not? If their punishment when they do it on purpose is different, it's logical that their carbon, if they do it by accident, should be different. So what is the carbon brought by a Irani Dachas, by the individuals of an Irani Dachas, if they violated the Isser B'shogeg? So you need Torah Achas to tell me that it's the same. They bring the same karbanos, just like a Yachid who violates other Isur and brings a Se'ira, they also bring a Se'ira. So Gemara says, there's a problem here, that you want to tell me that they have the same carbon. What could they possibly have brought? There is no carbon that they could have brought. Nothing is available for them to bring. Every other carbon is used up, and they're going to be the same as somebody. And their halachas are different than everybody else. So, therefore, there's really no option. You don't have to tell me that they have the same halacha as the regular yachid who's over Avodah Zarah, because they have to be the same as something. There's nothing else available. Why? If you want them to bring a par, that's what's brought by a tzibur and a Mashiach who violate a regular Isser. If you want them to bring a soyer, that's what's brought by a Nasi who violates a regular Isser. You want them to bring a Kisva or a Se'ira, that's what's brought by a Yachid who violates a regular Isser. You want them to bring Se'ira is also the same one that's brought by a Mashiach Nasi and Yachid who violates Isser Avodah Zarah. What might you say? Let them bring two korbanos together, a par and a soyer. That's also brought already. That's brought by a tzibur who violates an Isser Avodah Zarah. So they have to be the same as something. There's nothing else available. So why do I need a drasha to tell me, that they're going to be the same as a regular yachid? They have to be the same as something. So Gemara says, no, there was another option. They could have been a par and a soyer, but not the same as the tzibur. The tzibur brought the par as an ola and the soyer as a chatas. They could have brought the par as a chatas and the soyer as an ola. They could have switched it. Then it wouldn't be the same as anybody. Another option is that I would have thought that they don't get a carbon. There's no carbon that they could bring. The carbon is a privilege. You get a kapara if you bring a carbon. Maybe these Irnei Dachas people don't have the right to get any takana and therefore they don't have a carbon that they can bring. And therefore the pasuk teaches mitor achas that they could bring a carbon. Okay, this concludes this entire discussion. Now the Gemara refers back to the Mishnah and starts a whole new sugya, which is the Mishnah listed 15 women that cannot do Yibum because of their relationship with the Yavam. That's a woman who is married to Ruvain. Ruvain died. They now fall even to Shimon, but they are related to Shimon in other ways, which is called an erva, and therefore they cannot marry Shimon. And therefore they are putter from it. They don't have to do Yibum, they don't even have to do Chalitza. The entire thing is canceled and they are released. So the Gemara asks that Levi said there's a 16th case. Doesn't say what it was, but Rebbe reacts strongly. Rebbe says the only 16th case that exists is one that is a machlokes, and we don't discuss machlokes, and this Mishnah is not trying to discuss machlokes. It wants to lay down the rules without any discussion or disagreement involved. And Rebbe's phrase is that it looks to me like this Talmid Chacham has no brain in his head. He's reacted strongly. Now, what is the one case? So the Gemara says the one case that's left out is Shimon's mother. If Shimon's mother falls to him to Yibum, then he obviously can't do Yibum because that's a relationship which is an erva. Shimon's not allowed to marry his mother. Now, the problem is that Shimon's mother can't fall to Yibum because Shimon's mother could not have been married to Shimon's brother. Ruvain was Shimon's brother. If Ruvain was married to Shimon's mother, so even if it's not Ruvain's mother, even if Ruvain was born from a different mother, but this woman is still Ruvain's father's wife, because Ruvain and Shimon have to share a father. So this woman has to be, if she's Shimon's mother, she must at least be Shimon's father's wife, and therefore she would be Ruvain's father's wife. They share a father, and Ruvain is not allowed to marry his father's wife, and the marriage wouldn't count if he did. So there is no situation in which a mother could be married. There's no situation in which Shimon's mother could ever be married to Ruvain. The only way it could work out is if this woman became pregnant from Ruvain's father and gave birth to Shimon out of wedlock. That way, she was never married to Ruvain and Shimon's father, and therefore she is not Ruvain and Shimon's father's wife. How would that happen? So, Ruvain's father raped a woman. She gave birth to Shimon. Now, Ruvain and Shimon are brothers by their father. Then Shimon's mother went and married Ruvain, who's not related to him. She is Ruvain's father's rape victim, but no relation. And then Ruvain had died, and she falls to Shimon, who is her own son. So the Gemara says the problem here is that whether or not Ruvain is allowed to marry this woman, who's his father's own rape victim, we've seen earlier, is a machlokes. The machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim, whether that's allowed and whether there's any marriage that actually takes place in a situation like that. And so Rabbi said we didn't want to get involved in that machlokes, and that's why it's not listed in this Mishnah. Now for the rest of the daf, the Gemara is going to attack this concept, and the Gemara is going to say, no, I'm going to show you that there are machlokes listed in Mishnayos. So the Gemara's first example is the case where the woman who's falling to Yibum is forbidden to marry Shimon because of a lav, not an Issachar, just a regular losasei, and a losasei of Kedusha, that is someone who's not allowed to marry a Jew at all. That is if she's a mamzeres, for example. She was a mamzeres, she was born from a incestuous relationship, or she was the daughter of a mamzer, so she herself is a mamzeres. She's not allowed to marry any Yisrael. If she went and she married Ruvain, and then Ruvain dies and she falls even to Shimon, so there's a Mishnah in the next perek that lists this as being an example of a case where she falls to Yibum, to Shimon. The Yibum's not canceled, but she's not allowed to marry Shimon, and therefore she has to get Chalitza. Now, that's a machlokes because Rabbi Akiva says that she doesn't fall to Yibum at all. Rabbi Akiva holds that in a case of a woman who's blocked from Yibum by the mitzvah of Kedusha, she's not allowed to marry the guy with a lav, there she does not fall to Yibum. Yibum is cancelled. Chachamim say Yibum's not cancelled. It's only an Isser Kares that cancels Yibum. But the Mishnah there lists it. And so you see that we do discuss machlokes. So Gemara says that's in the next parak. In this parak here, in our Mishnah, we didn't want to discuss any machlokes because we want to lay down the rules initially to make it clear. So Gemara has another problem. Our Mishnah started off, and it spoke about the tzara. It said that the tzara of an erva is also freed from yibum, and she doesn't have to do yibum or chalitza. But Beis Shammai disagrees with that. No, it's only Beis Hillel holds that way. So you see, we are discussing machlokes. Gemara says no, Beis Shammai doesn't count. Beis Shammai in place of Beis Hillel is not a Mishnah at all. It's not an issue. The Gemara has a third question. That's the case of Eishes Achiv Shelo Haya Be'olama, where you have two brothers who were not alive at the same time. Reuven died before Levi was born. Now, this case works as follows. Reuven was married to a woman. Reuven died. Shimon did Yibum. Now she's married to Shimon. Levi is born at some point after Reuven died, and then Shimon dies. So this same woman falls to Yibum to Levi. Now that's fine. She can fall even from Shimon to Levi. The problem was that she's also Reuven's former wife. And Reuven, the fact that she's Reuven's wife is not a Yibum scenario to Levi because Levi was born after Reuven died. There's no mitzvah of Yibum there. Therefore, that relationship of brother's wife, when Levi sees this woman coming to him, she's his brother's wife, Reuven's wife, and there's no mitzvah of Yibum in that relationship because Reuven and Levi did not exist in the world together. Therefore, even though she does have a mitzvah of Yibum coming from Shimon, as Shimon's widow, she does not have a mitzvah of Yibum as being Reuven's widow, and therefore she's usher as brother's wife. Now, that is a machlokes. Shimon doesn't hold that that's an issue. So you see that in this case is listed in the Mishnah. So therefore you see again that we have a machlokes listed in the Mishnah. So the Gemara says no. There's two types of cases of a brother's wife where they weren't alive in the world at the same time. One of them Reb Shimon agrees, one of them Reb Shimon disagrees. The case where Levi was born before Shimon did Yibum to the woman, there Rabbi Shimon agrees that she cannot fall to Yibum. The only case he argues is where Levi was born after Shimon did Yibum already. So let's get the case straight. Reuven marries a woman. Reuven has a brother Shimon. Reuven dies. The woman falls to Yibum to Shimon. Now, if Levi is born before Shimon does Yibum, then this woman is usher to Levi during that time because she has no mitzvah of Yibum to Levi because Levi was born after Reuven died. That Isser will stay, and Shimon will agree that if she then does Yibum to Shimon and Shimon dies and she falls to Levi, she's blocked from that by the fact that she's Reuven's widow as well. However, the only case where they argue is if Shimon does Yibum first and then Levi's born. So this woman never had any Yibum relationship. She never had any Zika to Levi until Shimon dies. Then Rabbi Shimon would argue and say she never had a case where she was usher to Levi, and therefore she can fall to Yibum to him. So our Mishnah is talking about the case where Rabbi Shimon agrees, where Levi was born before Shimon did Yibum, between the death of Reuben and the Yibum of Shimon. So Gemara says that Rav Oshi argued on that. So what do you do according to Rav Oshi? Gemara says we already rejected Rav Oshi's approach. We already slugged him up. Okay, now the Gemara goes to its fourth case, its fourth example of where we see a machlokas here. And this is a lengthy discussion which requires some insight. The Gemara quotes Rav Yehuda in the name of Rav, and Rav Chia says this as well. Rav Chia was a Talmud of Rebbe, which is why it's going to be a problem. And they say that there's a Mishnah later that has a complex case. That complex case could fit in with any of the cases of our Mishnah. That's what Rav Chia says. That case could fit in with any of the cases of our Mishnah. The problem is going to be that whether it could fit in any of the cases of our Mishnah or not is a machlokes, and therefore what we're really saying is that our Mishnah is a machlokes. We're assuming that Rav Chia holds like Rebbe, and Rav Chia says that Mishnah and our Mishnah are discussing the same cases. They go together, and therefore if there's a machlokes whether or not it can fit with that Mishnah, it should be the same as our Mishnah. If you have a machlokes about that, you should have a machlokes about this. And the Gemara says no, Rebbe doesn't hold that way. Rav Chia says it could fit with Chia says that complex case could fit with the Mishnah. Rebbe holds it can't fit with our Mishnah, and therefore our Mishnah is not talking about any machlokes. That's the whole sugya for the rest of the daf, and that's the structure of it. We just need to fill in out what is this complex case and what is the machlokes about it. So we'll get into it as follows. The case is where you have four brothers. Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda. Reuven and Shimon are married to two sisters, let's say Rachel and Leah. So Reuven and Shimon both die without children. Rachel and Leah fall to Yibum, to Levi and Yehuda. Now, Rachel and Leah are not co-wives. They weren't married to the same man. They're married to two brothers. They're falling to Yibum, to Levi and Yehuda. Both of them are forbidden to do Yibum because of the Isser of Achos Zkukaso. Both women fall to Yibum to each man individually. Rachel and Leah fall to Yibum to Levi. Rachel and Leah fall to Yibum to Yehuda. Now, when Levi looks at Rachel and Leah and says they're both falling to Yibum, each one is the sister of a woman who has a Zika to him, who has a Yibum obligation to him, because both have a Yibum obligation to him. Now, that Zika connection is viewed midrabanan as a quasi-marriage, and therefore each of these is a sister of a Zikuka, a sister of a quasi-marriage. The Rabbanan did not allow that Yibum to take place, and therefore they can't do Yibum, they have to do Chalitza. They're not freed, because the sister of a Zikuka does not cancel Yibum, so in the Rabbanan she can't do Yibum, and therefore they have to do Chalitza. That's true both for Levi and for Yehuda. So none of them could do Yibum to any of them. Each woman, Rachel, Leah, are Achos Zkukaso to both Levi and Yehuda. Now, what happens though if one of these two women, Rachel and Leah, is an erva, let's say, to one of these two men? So let's say Rachel happens to be Levi's mother. So now Rachel can't do Yibum to Levi. Rachel is blocked from Yibum to Levi. However, Leah is not blocked, so Leah could do Yibum with Levi. Levi and Leah could do Yibum because Leah is not an Achos Skukaso. Rachel has no Zika to Levi. Rachel has no connection to Levi because she's his mother. She cannot do Yibum with him. Therefore, her sister is unrelated. She has no problem. She can do Yibum to Levi. Says the Mishnah further, this could happen with both of them. Let's say Rachel is Levi's mother, and her sister Leah is Yehuda's mother. Both men are a connection and an erva to one of the women, not the same woman. They have an erva relationship each to one of the women, not the same one. Therefore, they each cannot do Yibum with one of them. That one is not a Zekuka. They could do Yibum with the other one because that other one is not a Achos Zekuka, so no problem. Okay, that's what the Mishnah says there. Says the Gemara, Reb Chia said, all 15 relationships of erva that are in our Mishnah could fit into this scenario and could be the relationship which prevents a zika from forming between these two women and each one of the men. So let's say we said that Rachel was Levi's mother. Now Rachel could also be Levi's daughter, granddaughter, and all the other things. Mother, she couldn't be because mother is one of the cases which couldn't happen. But it could be any of the 15 relationships could apply to both women, each to one of the two men that they are falling to Yibum. So now the Gemara says that all 15 apply. The Gemara says that it's not everybody agrees that all 15 could apply. Okay, even though Reb Chia says all 15 could apply, you have Amoraim who discuss whether or not it's really true that all 15 could apply. So Rabbi Yehuda says the first 6 in the Mishnah it can't apply to. When we say all of them could apply, we mean the other 9. Why not the first 6? So Gemara says as follows: the daughter can't apply. Can't be a daughter. Now it could be, but the only way you could have a daughter is if this is a daughter that was born out of wedlock. And we're not talking about people. We don't want to talk about a daughter who's born out of wedlock. We want to talk about a case where it's born in wedlock. Now, why does daughter have to be out of wedlock? So the Gemara says as follows. It's very simple. This woman who's going to be falling to Yibum to both Levi and Yehuda has to be the daughter of one of them, and her sister has to be the daughter of the other one. It means you have two women who are sisters who are the daughters of two different men. If they're the daughters of two different men, so they're obviously not sharing a father, so they're not paternal sisters. They are maternal sisters. They share only a mother and not a father. Now, if they're sharing a mother and not a father, that means that whoever their mother was, she was married to both of their fathers separately. She was married at some point to Levi and at some point to Yehuda. Now, Levi and Yehuda are brothers. How could she possibly be married to both of them? If she first married Levi, then she's never allowed to marry Yehuda because she's Yehuda's brother's wife. And even if she divorced from Levi, she's still Eshes Ach. The Isser of brother's wife still applies, so she can never legally go ahead and marry Yehuda. So it must be that if there is a daughter that's born between this woman and Yehuda, that is a child that was born without a marriage. That's the daughter that we are discussing here. So says Rabbi Yehuda, in our case, we don't want to discuss a case of a child born out of wedlock, and therefore the case of the daughter, to have the daughter, which is listed in our Mishnah, fit into this complicated scenario, it's got to be out of wedlock. We're not discussing out of wedlock. Now, he goes further and he says the first 6, therefore, also have to be non-included because all of them involve a daughter. So the first 6 are the daughter, the daughter's daughter, the son's daughter, the wife's daughter, and the wife's daughter's daughter. So we don't want to discuss any of the daughter stuff because the daughter has to be out of wedlock. Therefore, it's all not included. Now, Abaye disagrees. Abaye says no. We are talking about where it's out of wedlock, and therefore it's referring to all of the cases. That's not an issue. However, Abaye himself says we are not referring to one case. We're not referring to the case of Eshes Hachol Shel Haya Ba'olamo. That is there where you had a relationship of being the brother's wife, where they were not in the world together, where Levi and Yehuda were born after Reuven and Shimon had died. That case we can't be discussing. The reason we're not discussing it is because it's a machlokes between Rabbi Shimon and the Chachamim whether such a case exists, whether it is permitted at all. Now, we don't want to talk about a case which is a machlokes. Now, Rav Safra disagrees, and he says, no, we're talking about the case as well. We're talking about a case which is a machlokes, and it's only in the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. Not a problem. So now, to conclude, our Gemara therefore says, according to Rav Safra, Rav and Rav Chia are talking about a case which is a machlokes. That means that they're saying that in Rav Chia is the Talmud of Rabbi, and Rabbi should have said the same thing. So how could Rabbi come here and say Mishnah is not talking about any machlokes? The Gemara answer is simply, Rabbi does not agree with Rav Chia, and he says we're not talking about a machlokes. The only thing that remains for us to explain is how this case works, and why does it only work according to the Shita of Rabbi Shimon. Why is he the only one who holds you could have a case of Eshes Ach Shel Haya Ba'olamai, of 2 sisters that are falling to 2 brothers to Yibum, and each one is mutter to one brother and not to the other brother, and neither of them to the same brother. So the case is as follows. You have 6 brothers, Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, Yisachar, Zevulun. Now, Reuven and Shimon, Levi, Yehuda are alive. Yisachar and Zevulun have not been born yet. Reuven and Shimon marry 2 women, call them Rachel, Leah, call them whatever you want. And the first thing that happens is that Reuven dies. Shimon is still alive. Reuven dies without kids, and his wife falls to Yibum, to Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda. Now, before anything happens, before any Yibum happens, Yisachar is born. Now, Yisachar is an Eshes Ach Shel Haya Ba'olamo. Yisachar was not around the same time as Reuven, and he's forbidden according to all opinions, even according to Rabbi Shimon, because he now is usher to Reuven's wife. He cannot do Yibum to her, and no Yibum has been done to her. She is a Yevama, she's an Eshes Ach, and she is forbidden according to all opinions. Now, then Levi goes ahead and does Yibum with Reuven's wife. Now Reuven's wife is now married to Levi, and she's forbidden to Yisachar forever. Then Shimon dies. Shimon's wife now falls to Yibum, to Levi, Yehuda, and Yisachar. Before anybody could do Yibum, Zevulun is born. Now, Shimon's wife is now forbidden to Zevulun in the same manner, because it's an Eshes Ach Shel Haya Ba'olamai, and he was born before Yibum happened. So she's open Yevama, and she's usher to Zevulun according to Rabbi Shimon as well. Now, what happens next is that Yehuda does Yibum to Shimon's widow. Now you have Reuven's wife is married to Levi, Shimon's wife is married to Yehuda. Reuven's wife is usher to Yisachar because of Eshes Ach Shel Haya Ba'olamai, and Shimon's wife is usher to Zevulun because of Eshes Ach Shel Haya Ba'olamai. Now, if Levi and Yehuda now die, those 2 women fall to Yibum, to Yisachar and Zevulun. And Shimon's wife, let's begin. Reuven's wife is also to Yisachar, but she's permitted to Zvulun. Why is she permitted to Zvulun? Because according to Rabbi Shimon, Zvulun's mutter to a Eishes Ach Shehaya Haba if she had Yibum done to her before he was born. That's where Rabbi Shimon is different than the other's opinion. The other Shita holds that Zvulun would be Aser to Reuven's wife as well, because Zvulun and Reuven are also Eishes Ach Shehaya Haba. They are also brothers that were not alive at the same time. According to Rabbi Shimon, Reuven's wife, who was then Levi's wife, and is now falling to Yisachar and Zvulun, would be mutter to Zvulun because Zvulun wasn't born until after she did Yibum to Levi. Now, the other wife, that is Shimon's wife, who is now married to Yehuda, she is permitted to Yisachar because Shimon and Yisachar were alive at the same time, and Shimon and Yehuda were alive at the same time. Therefore, she has a regular mitzvah of Yibum. There's no Isser of Eishes Ach Shehaya Haba. However, to Zvulun, she is also according to all opinions, because Zvulun was not born until after Shimon and Yehuda, until after Shimon had died. Yehuda was alive, but until after Shimon had died, and he was born before Yehuda did Yibum, and therefore Zvulun is now usher to this woman. So it comes out that according to Rabbi Shimon, you could have such a case, and therefore the only way to work this out is if we involve a machlokes. And the Gemara therefore wanted to say that Rabbi has to be holding this machlokes. And the Gemara answers no. Rabbi doesn't say that this Mishnah has to fit with our Mishnah at all. Our Mishnah was not trying to imply that it fits with this, and therefore there's no problem.